Who is Ashton Carter, the man likely to take over as Defence Secretary? Well, this and other issues are being discussed live now with former presidential candidate and retired Congressman Ron Paul, and we can cross live now to RT America for that interview.
It's reported that President Obama has chosen Chuck Hagel's replacement as Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter. Carter is a career DoD man and has spent at least 5 years in the Pentagon's number 2 and number 3 posts. Similar to the president himself, Carter, too, is an academic. He was a Harvard professor who headed up a program called the Preventive Defense Project, named after a book he co-authored back in 1999. In that book, he highlighted A, B, and C level threats to national security, where he cited China and Russia as potential threats. Now, Carter has been awarded the Department of Defense's highest praise, the Distinguished Service Medal, on 5 different occasions. He's an Oxford University Rhodes Scholar, former advisor to Goldman Sachs, and a senior partner at a technology firm. So what can we expect from Ashton Carter as the next Secretary of Defense? Joining me now to discuss these topics is retired Congressman Dr. Ron Paul, who also served in the military. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today. Let's dig right in. Now, just yesterday... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I said, very nice. Good to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Now, just yesterday, you said that it seems that nobody wants to be Obama's defense secretary. Now, that post has been somewhat of a revolving door, and in just the past 6 years, we've had 3 different faces fill that role. Now, a 4th incoming, from Bob Gates to Leon Panetta, and now outgoing Chuck Hagel. Given Carter's background, does this candidacy make a lot of sense? And if he's confirmed, what can we expect to see out of Carter? Will it be a different department than Hagel's?
Well, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and we wouldn't expect very much. But what's even worse is the foreign policy doesn't make any sense. That's why he's having trouble finding somebody. So how do you manage a policy that nobody can clearly define and nobody knows what to expect? And this is why he's looking for number 4 man to run the department. But I think it's really that is the real problem, is that we've taken it upon ourselves to be involved around the world. We don't know where we start, where we end, how long it's going to last. We're told we're in perpetual war, and nobody has a clear-cut policy. It's so different than it was, you know, back when wars were declared. We knew who the enemy was, and there was an end point. But now it's endless. The only thing that we know about these suggestions of the people that they might have, they're establishment people. They know about government intervention. They endorse the idea that we should be involved overseas, and they don't agree with me on the policy that non-intervention, minding our own business, would be best for America, and that's so clearly understood. There's nobody that would question the lack of understanding of that type of policy. So I would expect they're not going to find anybody who can carry out a policy that nobody understands.
Now, Carter's got a myriad of accomplishments and a lot of experience under his belt. He's obviously a very educated and an intellectual man. Carter has even served as the COO of the Department of Defense. But there's one thing that he's lacking. He's never, ever served in the armed forces. All of his predecessors have served, and you yourself have served. How do you think a scholar serving as the defense secretary will affect America's role in fighting ISIS or other similar threats abroad?
Well, you know what? I wouldn't worry a whole lot about that, because if I had somebody that for various reasons didn't serve in the military, hopefully noble, but they had a position that made a lot of sense and they understood what national defense was all about and why intervention is bad, whether or not they have served probably doesn't matter that much. I do think there's some advantage for an individual like myself who spent 5 years in the military and had actual experience there. But I think it's the understanding of what policy should be, the difference between non-intervention and intervention, and how we should treat our friends and how we should work with the people around the world. That is what counts, and not whether or not they've had a specific number of time in the military. A matter of fact, if they've spent too much time in the military and loved it, and they got, you know, to the point where they accepted everything that the military does, I think then it would be a negative.
So do you think maybe this could be an advantage for Carter, seeing as he's never served?
Well, no, I don't think for him, because I haven't seen any signs that he has resisted or criticized the notion that we should have perpetual war. That, you know, he's worked with Democrats, I believe with Republicans, and he believes in troops overseas. And so, no, I don't think that the fact that he hasn't served would be a positive for him. Maybe it would have awakened him a little bit or something. But I don't think that should be the litmus test.
Now, Dr. Paul, you mentioned in your Straight Talk recording about Hagel's opposition to the president's no boots on the ground motto. Hagel leaning more towards preventive warfare tactics in Syria, not just against ISIS, but rather for regime change against Assad. Now, given Carter's book and Harvard project of the same name called Preventive Warfare, do you see America escalating our presence in the Middle East, specifically in Syria?
Well, I sure don't see it de-escalating, because, you know, the pressure is being put on the administration, and the hawks are growing in number, and I think they're going to keep escalating the war. But they're in a bind. The American government's in a bind because they want to get rid of Assad, and Assad is fighting our enemies, ISIS. So it makes no sense. The policy is so ridiculous. A guy like Carter is not going to straighten this out, and since he believes in intervention, he may well be like the rest. It will accelerate. At least it'll prolong it. And this is what worries me the most. Our administration, especially now, is arguing the case. Don't expect this to be short-lived. It's not like we know who the enemy is and we know how we're going to win and it's going to be over in a year or whatever. No, be prepared. We have perpetual war for the sake of perpetual peace. And that's why I'm not very optimistic about what's going on. But I think people should realize that the dilemma that the president is facing is a dilemma of policy, and it's not a dilemma of only Obama's policy. It's a dilemma of the policy of intervention. It's a policy, it's a dilemma of the fact that we're doing some things that we don't have the ability to do.
Yeah, it is a little bit curious, seeing as Carter has a vested interest in expanding war to perpetuate it, because he's an advisor to many companies that actually have an interest in supplying weapons. So do you think the likely appointment of Ashton Carter will set up further militarization abroad after Obama's term comes to an end?
Yeah, but I think that would be the case anywhere, because anybody who gets appointed are generally very attuned to what's happening in the military-industrial complex, and nobody's arguing the case now for reducing weapons. There was a chance that we would be back off a few years back, but now with ISIS being the enemy, I'm sure when the appropriation bill comes up, even before next year, there's going to be plenty of money put in there. And, of course, the American weapons are being blown up and stolen from our enemies, or sold to our enemies, or given to our enemies, or we've given the weapons to our enemies. So, wow, they're going to have to build more weapons. So the money's going to keep flowing to the DOD, and they're going to keep building weapons. And whether the connection between the secretary is clear or not, there's always a connection behind the scenes between those who administer our policy and those people who make money off war.
Now, final question, Dr. Paul. By all accounts, everyone is anticipating a Clinton landslide in 2016, although Hillary herself has not actually announced her candidacy. But if she won the White House, it's likely that she would like to fill that seat with her own person, wouldn't you say? Wouldn't Carter just sort of be then a placeholder, kind of a seat warmer for the interim, if you will?
Yeah, I think so, because he's not probably as interventionist as others, and probably Michelle Flournoy would get the attention of Hillary. And she has a very, very clear connection to the military-industrial complex, and there would be no hope whatsoever that any war would be wound down with her. And she would, unfortunately, have the support of many Republicans in the Congress and in the Senate, and that, to me, is rather sad.
All right, Dr. Ron Paul, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Former Congressman and three-time presidential hopeful, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you.